Hi there, I'm Mark, and this is Article Club, where every month we read, annotate, and discuss one great article on race, education, or culture. I'm really happy to be back. It's April, everybody, and we are going to be discussing The Egg by Susan Berfield and a team of reporters from Bloomberg. And I'm very happy to say that we have an interview with Miss Berfield today, done by Melinda. Melinda's back and she did this interview. And by the way, she's right here. And so just
Hello.
hello, Melinda. And I have to say, I was editing the interview that you had with Susan Berfield of this piece, and it was great. And I just wanted to sort of see, like, how was it to interview her?
She was great. It was such an honor to interview her. She's spent many, many months reporting and investigating and following a section of this very, very big article. She was wonderful to talk to. I think that, if we had more time, we could have definitely like delved into the article even deeper and then also got some insight into other things that she's interested in as like an offshoot from this article. So I really hope everyone enjoys it. I had a lot of fun talking to her.
Yeah, it was great to listen to it. And thank you, Melinda, for doing it. And she was great. And yes, if you're a person who is a little bit intimidated still by the length of this article, let me just tell you, after listening to this interview and after rereading the article, I'm like, this is an article that we really need to discuss, even though, by the way, it's an hour. And so just, if you're a little bit nervous, go ahead and listen to this interview. And hopefully at the end, you'll be like, okay, I'm going to be signing up for the discussion on the 27th. Okay, so here is the interview right now.
Welcome, Susan Berfield. Very excited to have you on here. It's an honor to have you to be a part of Article Club.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
This article, The Global Fertility Trade, A Story of Extraction, Exploitation, Opportunity in Bloomberg, published on October 15th of 2024. As I was telling Susan off mic, it is possibly one of the most compelling and profound pieces I have read in a very, very long time. It introduced me to a topic that I actually knew nothing about, embarrassingly. And I wanted to ask you at first, like, what was the impetus for writing this article? What was the first time you heard about the global egg trade?
So, first of all, thank you for that. And, it's like a great honor when an investigative reporter hears that they've written something that no one knew anything about. So that's often our aim. In this particular instance, this is the effort of 10 of us really working almost full time for a year. And so when I say we, I really mean we. But the initial impetus for the idea was from one of our reporters on the investigative team and a reporter in Tokyo who were looking at the growing number of fertility clinics in Asia. And the fact that private equity was getting involved. That's something that we had also seen in the US. I had been looking into fertility clinics and some of the mishaps that occurred. But when we started looking at the global business, what we realized is that if you wanted to think about this in I say it's a crass way, but that's only because we're talking about humans and life and and people really at their most vulnerable when they're trying to start families. And at the same time, that this is mostly a for-profit business. So if we look at that as business reporters, which we all are, what we started thinking about is what are the most important resources or supplies necessary? And, with all the technology that we have, it still requires a sperm and an egg to
Right.
create an embryo and potentially a human being. Sperm is pretty plentiful. These are not.
Right.
And for
Yes.
a whole bunch of other reasons, in terms of just like, well, the gendered expectations we have about women and motherhood and their bodies, the concerns about reproductive rights, all of that kind of came together to make us realize that, focusing on the egg and the trade of eggs across borders, from mostly single women who are mostly doing it for money to people who can afford to pay for eggs was a really compelling idea and opened up
Yes.
all the possibilities that you described in our title, which is exploitation and also opportunity.
Yes, that is such an interesting like space to come from, especially the time that we live in, right? Especially as you mentioned, like technology letting us move forward. Like women are having babies in their 50s because of IVF, and that's like a wonderful miracle. But to the vulnerability point that you make, I kept thinking that while I was reading this, and I was wondering, you are obviously familiar with the whole team and all the stories that you have written and woven together. You focused on the Los Angeles portion with the like quote egg girls and the Taiwan portion, Brandy and Amber. And something I found really interesting, and I wanted to know more about this, is there's this odd cross section of like empowerment, but also vulnerability with these women. Like they are under anesthesia to get these eggs harvested. They've taken a bunch of hormones. It's a whole process. But then, particularly with the egg girls, they're like, well, I'm doing this because I want a lifestyle that I want to live, right? I want to feel independent economically, and this is a thing that I can do. And so I'm wondering, like, were they aware of that in there? Did they feel vulnerable at all? Did they only feel empowered when you were covering them for a year?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And really like that gets at the crux of our reporting effort. And
Mhm.
honestly, some, conversations among all of us, and mostly based on like the reporting experience that we had, we started to view this in different ways. And,
Mhm.
that's really what the story we hope allows readers to do also. With the so-called egg girls, they are the embodiment of this as an opportunity. It is an opportunity that comes with risks.
Right.
And, as you described, like they are undergoing a medical procedure voluntarily that benefits other people, but that
Mhm.
they get paid for. There's not many other operations or medical procedures that require or allow that in the world anywhere. Like it's quite unusual. And what I would say about the egg girls, and maybe in particular about Brandy and
Mhm.
Amber, is that they were aware that there were some health risks. What they regarded, but they were also making a calculation that those risks are worth the money that they can make.
Mhm.
They also had not suffered any severe health consequences. That's not
Right.
true of every egg donor. It's
Mhm.
also, it's not true of everyone who goes through IVF. You can have a reaction, an overreaction to the
Mhm.
hormones that
Right.
you use to stimulate the ovaries, right? So that's that anyone is vulnerable, but in, in some cases, the egg, we say donors, but of course they are being paid. They're being paid fairly or a fair or unfair amount, let's say, in the
Mhm.
case of a young girl from India. But they've made a calculation. What we found is that, that calculation was, I guess I would say, is not complete because there isn't research into the long-term health effects of repeated donations. And by that, I
Right.
mean repeated use of the hormones. There's no long-term research. So they're taking a calculated risk, but they don't have all the information that they need. And in that case, they did sort of brush it off. I think, especially in Amber's case, she, in the course of the reporting that we did, donated a total of 16 times. The
Mhm.
recommended number of cycles for anybody is 6.
6. Yeah, she's in double digits.
Yeah. And, and in the same way that many women, might still feel like they're up against a biological clock of some
Sure.
sort.
Sure.
Of course, you can try to get pregnant later, but often you cannot do it with your own eggs. These women are also facing that same kind of time pressure. So, past the age of 30, most would-be parents won't want the eggs of someone who's older than 30.
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
for both Brandy and Amber and lots of other women, they know that there's a limit to how long they can do this. Perversely gives them the incentive to do it more frequently.
Yes, that is something that I found really interesting too, because in the piece that all of you and all of your colleagues are describing these stories of these women, the sands shift quite a bit, right? Like I think the woman from Buenos Aires, she donated 7 times, right? But that the reporting on that was interesting because you did a lot of investigation of like, well, nobody really wants to say that she did it, and that's really on her. And so I'm wondering, like, with the young girls, because I think something's interesting is like there are women that at all different stages of this who have done it for a lot, or like the young girl in India who's like just doing this the first time because she wants a smartphone. Do you see, or at any time are they thinking about like what kind of protections are they looking for if they're looking for any? Are they thinking about guardrails? Like, are they thinking about what they want from the agents? Because there's so many hands involved in all of this, right? You referenced private equity. I mean, I think, like I was shocked and also not shocked, but I mean, do they think about as they go on this journey, like I was really vulnerable. I wish there was a safety precaution at any time.
I think plenty of women who have gone through this as donors do have a lot of questions afterward. And some do during, and they should be able to end the process midway through if they decide to. But it's complicated because the women are drawn into the lives of the would-be parents, whether or not they know them. They know that
Right.
eggs are going to help a family.
Mhm.
So, ending a cycle midway through, I think is a pretty emotionally fraught decision.
Mhm.
Having regrets afterward is probably more common. There's a group called We Are Egg Donors where women are sharing their stories. They do some advocacy. And I think what most people who have gone through the process or are contemplating it probably wish for, and what we think is reasonable, is that there is a way to really make sure that these women have all the information that they need. Like in the case of the young girl in India, very extreme. I mean,
Very
she was
extreme.
so young to understand, obviously, and it was illegal.
Yeah, it's illegal.
She was 13 or 14, right?
Right.
And in India, the law is the woman who is donating her eggs must be 23. So there's no question there. But she was lured in by the promise of enough money to buy a mobile phone. There's always been the concern that allowing these women to be compensated is a kind of economic incentive or potentially form of economic coercion that has to be looked at. On the other side, these are women who are going through something that takes time, and takes a toll no matter what, even if it goes well. You're like 2 weeks of discomfort and and then a procedure that requires you to go under anesthesia. And so I think the idea that they should be paid is now pretty commonly accepted, but not everywhere. Like there are places, countries that believe that this should only happen if the women are willing to truly donate their eggs. But I think, when there is money involved and when the women who are agreeing to sell their eggs are in need of some money or even like some validation, in the case of the woman in Argentina, like she said, this makes me feel good about myself.
Yeah, she's helping a family. I know. That story is difficult and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, and she has a lovely relationship with a family that has 2 kids because of her. So anyway, I think everyone, sees what they need differently. But I think overall, what we could say is that, yes, like there should probably be better follow-up and just follow-up monitoring of the egg donors, and that benefits them and it benefits the families that might have kids using their eggs, that there's research done into the long-term health consequences, if there are any, of repeated donation. Seems like something everyone can agree on. And that the families or the would-be parents who are buying eggs, do as much as they can to understand where the eggs are really coming from.
Right.
That's not really easy. And it might seem unfair to put the burden on these families at a time of like high stress, but in the way that, we as consumers have to be aware of where products and other things come from. Like that is probably also going to be true for the fertility industry for a while.
That's just a very interesting point, because I think it's the story of the woman in Buenos Aires that you mentioned, that she's such a prism of so many feelings, right? Because she clearly she sees a picture of the baby that she helped create for this family that really wanted a child. And she's like, this is the sign that I'm doing the right thing. And I feel like as a reader, you want to, like, you're on her side. Like, yes, if you're doing something that makes you feel good, it makes you feel fulfilled. But as you were saying, this is also taking place in a backdrop of like exploitation of other people. And something that you mentioned too just now that I think is really interesting is the lack of transparency around like how many eggs are actually harvested. That was a part of the piece that I found terrifying, that like you don't know. When in your investigation, did you see any countries that were like fully transparent, that had laws of like, you need to, like, I don't even know how you would do that, I guess, like to be transparent with the woman of like, we did extract 20 eggs. We're not lying to you. We're not trying to steal your eggs.
Right. I mean, I think in the US, people can feel confident.
Okay.
And in fact, because, we've heard from a lot of people after this came out, I heard from someone who had gone through an egg retrieval and said that, and it was admittedly a pretty fancy clinic, that that she chose to stay away.
Okay.
Well, procedure. Anyway, and that the clinic kind of like put up on a screen the whole procedure so she could see the eggs, right? And the
Right.
number. That, I mean, that was her choice. And obviously there are other ways to be certain that the doctor or the embryologist is being honest with you. I think, what we wrote about in Greece, in Crete, was again like an extreme case, but not isolated. Let's put it that way.
I see.
In that case, there was increased demand for eggs at the clinic, in part because they did a lot to promote themselves, in part because the war in Ukraine disrupted a lot of the fertility, kind of the global fertility business.
Mhm.
And so people looked elsewhere. And, we don't know a lot of the details about that yet, just because there's a police investigation underway. But, it looks like the embryologist in this case did deceive some women who went in for their own IVF treatments, right? And
Mhm.
took their eggs and gave them to other women. And so,
So terrifying.
yeah, so that's kind of among the worst case scenarios outcomes. It's not common, but it doesn't have to be common to be pretty horrifying.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Two last questions for you. One, I wanted to highlight a part of the article that I was not expecting, but I found fascinating. The women who have gone through menopause and they are giving away their urine, which then is a ingredient to make the hormones that the women who are selling their eggs need to use. I mean, is there another facet of this that you are interested in investigating that is like that? I kept thinking it was like, oh my gosh, it's like a life cycle. Like it's completely circular, this whole
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. No, exactly. And thank you. When we realized that, yeah, we had all those same ideas about it and worked really hard to figure out both where that was happening in China. We had a great reporter in China who helped us, and how to fit it into the story. But you're exactly right. I mean, the drugs were one or two of the drugs were initially developed using, right, the hormones that are extracted from urine of postmenopausal women. And that's just because the hormones are higher levels and makes it easier. And of course, now there's synthetic alternatives, but it still does happen. And it is kind of amazing,
Yeah.
as I'm like, yes, women in this one village that we reported from, but others, pee into little buckets, and
Yes.
then it's collected by like a kind of drug manufacturer or supply, I should say supply manufacturer that, extracts it, purifies it, all of that, and then passes it along to drug makers. And yeah, what is there to say about that? It's just super interesting. And, I guess the one thing that it highlighted for us is that fertility is a big business, that
Yeah.
there are a lot of drug makers that are making a lot of money by selling these drugs. And that is why private equity investors are involved. I think anywhere that there is a lot of money going into healthcare, and especially healthcare like this, that everyone needs to kind of just keep an eye on it. The fertility industry overall is not very well regulated, especially
Right.
talk about the cross-border, the global.
Mhm.
Within each country, yeah, the US, it is regulated and things do happen. But for instance, the women who are coming from Taiwan and then returning to Taiwan, like there is no record of like what happens to them. They are not in
Yeah.
touch with the clinics, they're not in
Right.
touch with families. They just kind of vanish. They
Yes.
have provided the most crucial resource. They vanish. They're not the patient. They're not
Y-
a customer.
Right. They're an important foundational piece that then gets erased.
Yeah.
It is wild to think about that. One last question for you. We're all very, very excited to be reading this in the coming months. Do you have any questions for our readers? Is there anything that you want readers to take away, or you're interested to know what readers think about this piece? Anything in particular?
Oh, well, I mean, it's been really moving to hear from people who've had experiences,
Mhm.
either as IVF patients or people who have sold their eggs. And one thing that I'm particularly interested in, and this sort of more relates to people who might have been conceived using donor sperm, because that's been going on for much longer. But,
Right.
there's a growing movement for the rights of the donor conceived individuals to
Mm.
either know, who the donors were, or at least to be able to contact them if they want to when the individuals turn 18. And it's very interesting to hear from those people and that perspective, because many of them who are conceived with sperm are adults now, and they're the ones who, doing this advocacy work. So if among any of your readers, there are people who have had the experience of, meeting half siblings or, searching for a donor successfully or not, that would be really interesting. And just as an investigative reporter, obviously, if anyone has had a bad experience or is aware of any abusive practices, we're always looking to follow up.
Okay, excellent. Okay, would love to be part of that as well. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for, again, being a prolific writer. I'm very grateful to get the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks so much, Melinda.
I want to thank Susan Berfield yet again for not just writing your piece, but also for coming onto Article Club to talk about your wonderful article. Thank you so much for sharing generously your views. And also to Melinda, thanks so much for doing that interview. Really, really appreciate you both. Hey, everybody, if you've been listening, if you've been reading, if you've been part of Article Club, I definitely want to encourage you to sign up for this discussion. We're going to be discussing the egg on April 27th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific time, and it's going to be on Zoom. All you need to do is sign up, and it's free, and it's at highlighter.cc/discussion is how you actually can sign up. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just email me at mark@articleclub.org. I hope you have a great weekend ahead, and thank you everybody for your interest and engagement. Talk to you later.